what I know about who I am and where I come from, is a difficult question to answer.
I know that I was adopted at 4 months old from South Korea.
I was born to a single mother.
I had been put up for adoption basically because they were so poor they couldn't afford to have an abortion.
There's little Chae, Kimberly and Tamara know about their biological families, and what they know, they can't be sure is true.
I have 3 pages of documentation from the adoption agency.
But the information was very limited.
From what it says, my mother was unmarried and that was the reason that I was given up at birth.
And later I have learnt that I was the product of an affair. It calls into question anything that I do know about myself or where I came from.
It's becoming harder to hold on to what's in those documents as potentially being fact or truth.
That's what I believed for quite a while, probably another 20 years before I found there was more to the story.
They were one of 3,600 South Korean babies sent to Australia in the decades after the Civil War, adopted from one of the country's largest adoption agencies, Eastern Social Welfare Society. Some say they were sent abroad like luggage.
To think of the families that had children stolen, to think of the adoptees who have suffered so much because they carry this deep, deep grief because they weren't perhaps relinquished or orphaned as they were told that they were, is, I think, the most tragic thing for me.
Tamara believes she was just hours old when she was taken from her mother and placed in foster care.
I still had blood on me from the birth when they had taken custody of me.
Within months, she was Australia-bound, taken from her family, her culture and her birth country.
There's a lot of impact from the trauma of being separated from your birth mother on the day that you're born, and I'm still learning about all the impacts.
Tamara and Kimberly were welcomed into safe, caring homes.
I'm a little bit lucky because my dad was Indian, so our family was pretty much one of those rainbow families, and that was really good support for me, where I didn't feel like I was the only person in the town who looked the way that I did.
I got very lucky having a father who is Chinese, so growing up in a household with another Asian person. I've always had access to my documents. We have a photo album that we bring out every adoption anniversary.
But others, like Chae, weren't so lucky. He was abused by his adoptive mother.
You know, there's this idea that I'm so lucky and should be very grateful for coming from this terrible place and being with this woman who saved these children. It didn't matter potentially what my experience was in reality.
Chae was brought up in regional Queensland during the rise of Pauline Hanson.
I believe we are in danger of being swamped by Asians.
There was a dramatic increase into racially motivated hate crimes. Yeah, it was very unsafe to be an Asian person. Yeah, I didn't know anything about Asian people, but all I knew is I wanted to be as far away from being Asian as I could.
For Chae, it's been a harrowing journey to discover his Korean identity. His adoptive mother withheld vital documents and photos, which he finally received when she died.
When you think about people's power over your identity, you know, I have a person who really purposely withheld that from me.
4 years ago, he almost gave up fighting.
Yeah, I tried to take my life. I learnt for the first time around some of the mental health impacts that affect adopted people.
When children are separated from their mother, they can suffer lifelong attachment issues. Transracial and international adoptees can face race-based identity crises as they grow up, and they're 4 times more likely to attempt suicide than non-adoptees.
You know, how could we have a 4 times higher rate of suicide if we've been given this better life? And so for the first time, I started to look into the possibility that, yeah, I might have a family out there.
Chae submitted his case to the South Korean Truth and Reconciliation Commission to investigate the circumstances of his adoption. A total of 367 adoptees from 11 countries have put their cases forward. The agency he, Tamara and Kimberly were adopted from is under investigation for falsifying documentation, failure to properly vet prospective parents, and coercing South Korean parents into giving up their children. causing irreparable harm to the Korean adoptee community.
The injustices that have happened to these tiny babies with no agency, no voice, no chance, and to grow up believing a story and to then be told, oh, actually, no, that's wrong. You know, I think you question everything.
The damning report found the Korean government responsible for facilitating a foreign adoption scheme rife with fraud and had been influenced by private agencies, leading to a profit-driven max exportation of children, a clear human rights violation.
When it comes to our basic human right to our identity and knowing our identity, yeah, I do believe that my human rights have been violated.
There are now calls for Australia to hold an inquiry of its own, something Labor has promised to do if re-elected.
The Australian government has facilitated adoptions from all these countries, and I don't think it is possible for us as Korean adoptees here in Australia to reconcile our identities or to move past these human rights violations without working together with our government.
Kimberly now helps fellow adoptees work through their grief. She plans to travel to Korea to investigate her own story.
Being in the country that I was born in is going to be a huge emotional journey, and I feel like when I'm there, then maybe I'll have a few more hints as to what my next steps will be.
Tamara has travelled to Korea multiple times. The loss of her mother tongue makes it challenging to get information. She has found possible relatives of her biological father, but when she asked the adoption agency to use DNA to find her birth mother, she was shut down.
They pretty much told me that they had looked all they could and so sorry, we can't find her. It really felt like they were trying to give me the brush off, and that was really upsetting. It never gets easier to hear that.
Thankfully, she's part of a strong community of Korean adoptees who are hoping their calls for justice will finally be heard.
I think what most adoptees would like first and foremost is an apology from the Korean government and real ways of helping us to access our language and culture and reconnect with all of the things that we've lost.
Even though I find that connecting to my Asian culture is still very challenging, I've found, a family of other adopted people, and despite all those experiences, I still love Australia, and every day I'm growing to love Korea more. And I can say now that I'm an Asian Australian.
Wow. Which would be an unbelievable amount of progress for him to even get to that point. Because it's sort of, so many aspects of your identity you just take for granted, you can forget how elemental that is. Like, what they're experiencing is more than a desire. It's beyond articulation, I guess, which is why I'm struggling to articulate
it. As there is more and more of an understanding of the attachment to your mother when you're born,
totally.
And the brain chemistry and everything.
Yeah.
Children are so easy to exploit.
Oh,
it's just heartbreaking. The damage is...
And it's devastating and lifelong.
Yeah.
And there are so many layers to the trauma here. It's, the people left behind in South Korea, the children who were essentially exported, not just to Australia, but to other countries.
The parents who adopted who thought they were doing something
the right thing.
Totally.
Yeah, and that is, there are so many aspects of damage to this story that it feels like some sort of a government inquiry is the only way to solve it.
Well, and we wouldn't be alone if we did it, is the other thing. So in Denmark, Netherlands, France, Norway, other countries have done this.
It's time.
It's worth doing, yeah.
If you find yourself in need of help, crisis support is available 24/7 through Lifeline on 13 11 14.